Have you ever looked at a perfect neighborhood with its perfect lawns and perfect houses and wondered what dark secrets lie behind the perfectly painted doors? Welcome to Deepu Kader Stories. In Willow Creek Estates, the rules were everything. The color of your mailbox, the height of your grass, every detail was policed by one woman, Carolyn Reed. But one day, a new man moved in. A quiet man who didn't seem to care about her power. A man who, to Carolyn, was simply a target for her prejudice. This is the story of what happens when a woman with absolute control tries to break a man with absolute discipline. A man she thought was just another resident who needed to be put in his place, but who was actually an undercover federal agent hunting a far greater monster hiding in their midst. Join me as we uncover the moment it all came crashing down. The Unraveling on Primrose Lane. The air on Primrose Lane that Tuesday morning was thick with the scent of cut grass and unspoken rules. It was a perfect day. Too perfect. The kind of day where the sunlight feels like an interrogation lamp, exposing every blade of grass that dared to grow a single millimeter too tall. In the community of Willow Creek Estates, perfection was not an aspiration. It was a requirement, and Carolyn Reed was its chief enforcer. She stood on the immaculate sidewalk, her shadow falling long and sharp across the lawn of number 214. The house belonged to a new resident, a Mr. Samuel Jones. She had been watching him for weeks. Something about him felt wrong. He was too quiet, too self-contained. His lawn was perfect. Yes, his trash receptacles were always retrieved on time, exactly 1 hour after pickup. But his calm felt like a challenge, a quiet rebellion. Today, the rebellion was a pair of terracotta planters by his front door. A small thing, insignificant to the outside world. But here, in Willow Creek, it was a declaration of war. The approved color palette was sandstone, earth tones, muted. Terracotta was vibrant. It was an intrusion. She saw him step outside into the morning, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak tree that stood sentinel over his property. He seemed to be enjoying himself. Carolyn could not allow that. She walked across the lawn, her sensible shoes leaving no impression on the dense turf. She did not call out a greeting. Greetings were for friends. This was official business. The Homeowners Association, the HOA. Samuel turned as she approached, offering a polite, small nod. His eyes were calm. They held no fear. This, more than anything, fueled the fire inside her. Her voice was not loud. It was sharp, precise. A surgeon's scalpel. The planters, she said, were a clear violation. Section C, paragraph 4 of the community bylaw. The color, it was wrong. Samuel listened. He did not interrupt. When she was finished, his reply was quiet, measured. He said he had not realized. He thanked her for bringing it to his attention. He said he would look into it. Look into it. The words hung in the air. They were not the words of submission she expected. They were the words of consideration, of choice, as if he, not the HOA, would be the final arbiter. Her face tightened. She spoke of other things. A delivery truck that had idled for 5 minutes too long the previous week. The faint sound of music she thought she heard after 10 p.m. last Friday. Each accusation was a stone, thrown at the wall of his composure. He absorbed them all. And then, the moment arrived. The one that would be replayed on phone screens and in whispered conversations for months to come. Carolyn, feeling her authority slipping, her control being met with a quiet strength she could not comprehend, took one step closer. Her words became personal. No longer about rule. They were about him. About people like him, who did not understand, who did not belong. Samuel's stillness became something else. Not passive. It was heavy. Ancient. That stillness broke her. She felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. A feeling so ugly it choked her. In that moment of blinding fury, she did something irreversible. She leaned forward, and she spat. The act was small, vile, a grotesque stain on the calm of the morning. Samuel did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood there as the silence that followed crashed down. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean, folded handkerchief. He wiped his face with a deliberate, steady hand. Then he looked directly into Carolyn Reed's eyes. For the first time, she saw something behind his calm. Not anger, something far colder, far heavier. Authority. "Ma'am," he said. His voice, the same quiet, measured tone, yet it now carried an impossible weight. "My name is Special Agent Samuel Jones of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." He paused. "And you have just assaulted a federal officer in the performance of his duties." He reached into his jacket and presented the badge. The golden shield seemed to burn in the morning light. Carolyn stared. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The rage vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. A car door closed down the street. A quiet, final sound. A Fairfax County patrol car rolled up to the curb, its lights off. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. Their movements were calm, professional. They had been briefed. Carolyn Reed, the Queen of Willow Creek, stood frozen as they approached her. She looked from the badge to the officers, and back again. A choked sound escaped her lips, but the words died before they were born. There were no excuses left. There was only the act, and its immediate consequence. But this moment, this unraveling, it did not begin with a pair of planters. It did not begin with anger. It began with a ghost. 3 months earlier, it began with the reason Special Agent Samuel Jones came to Willow Creek in the first place. The ghost of Willow Creek. 3 months before the incident with the planters, the mission began not with a bang, but with a file. A single manila folder placed on a polished table in a windowless room, deep within the Hoover building. The folder had a name on it, Arthur Finch, but inside, there was mostly empty space. A testament to a man who had mastered the art of being unseen. Samuel's superior, Deputy Director Sterling, called Finch the devil's accountant. He was less a man and more a financial phantom who moved billions of dollars for the kinds of people who did not like leaving trails. Cartels in South America, corrupt corporations in Eastern Europe, shadowy domestic syndicates. Finch was the linchpin, the man who could bring down entire criminal empires with a single ledger. But first, they had to find the ledger, and after 2 years of chasing whispers and dead ends, they had finally found the man. He was living in plain sight, hiding behind a perfect lawn, in a beautiful house, in a beautiful neighborhood, Willow Creek Estates. The operation was codenamed Gilded Cage, for the beautiful prison it had become for its target. To catch a ghost, Samuel understood he had to become someone else entirely. He shed his own life like a second skin, packing it away in a mental box. Special Agent Samuel Jones, a man with a quiet apartment in Alexandria and a love for old jazz records, vanished. In his place, Robert Vance was born, a tech millionaire, recently and very publicly retired after selling his software company for a fortune. He was crafted to be a man with more money than sense, eccentric but harmless, looking for a quiet life away from the hustle of Silicon Valley. The Bureau, through a series of shell corporations, bought a house for him on Primrose Lane. Number 214. They bought him a German sedan that was expensive but not flashy. The choice of a man who appreciated engineering over status. They filled his closets with clothes that whispered wealth, not shouted it. Every detail of Robert Vance's life was fabricated, cross-referenced, and memorized until it felt more real to Samuel than his own past. His first week in Willow Creek was a masterclass in quiet observation. He did not rush. He let the neighborhood come to him. He walked his perfectly manicured lawn each morning. He waved to neighbors from a comfortable distance. He studied the rhythm of the community, the comings and goings, the unspoken social hierarchy. He saw his target, Arthur Finch, only twice in those first 7 days. Once, getting his mail with a practiced, casual air. The second time, driving away in a modest, American-made car. The man was an absolute professional. He was invisible. He blended into the suburban tapestry so perfectly he was practically transparent. But someone else did not blend in. She stood out like a lighthouse in a dense fog, casting a harsh, judgmental beam in every direction. Carolyn Reed. Samuel saw her from his kitchen window, lecturing a team of gardeners about the unacceptable angle of a newly pruned hedge. He saw her leaving a neatly folded, brightly colored note on the windshield of a delivery truck that had idled for 30 seconds too long. A penalty notice. A fine. The HOA. She was the uncrowned queen of this manicured kingdom, the self-appointed warden of the gilded cage. Samuel knew, with the certainty of a seasoned agent, that he had to understand the system she commanded. He needed to test its limits, to see how the gears turned. So, one sunny afternoon, he placed a brand new patio umbrella on his back deck. It was a handsome, high-quality umbrella, and it was beige. He knew from the 300-page rulebook, which he had read 3 times, that the only approved color for patio umbrellas was ivory. A subtle difference, a meaningless one to any rational mind. But rules in Willow Creek were not about meaning or rationality. They were about control. He waited. The next morning, it was there. A crisp, white envelope in his mailbox. No stamp. It had been delivered by hand. An act of personal enforcement. Inside, there was a single sheet of heavy bond paper. It was not a friendly warning. It was a formal citation, complete with a case number, a fine, a penalty fee for the umbrella. It was signed, with a flourish that spoke of immense self-satisfaction, by Carolyn Reed, President, Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Samuel folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He now understood the terrain of his new battlefield completely. In this place, compliance was not a choice. It was a weapon, and in the hands of Carolyn Reed, it was always loaded and ready to fire. The Queen's Gambit. Samuel, now fully inhabiting the persona of Robert Vance, knew his first move toward his target had to be subtle, almost accidental. The community's monthly wine club, held in the tastefully decorated clubhouse, was the perfect venue. Arthur Finch, according to the Bureau's intelligence, was a reluctant but consistent member. It was part of his flawless camouflage, an essential thread in the fabric of his ordinary life. Samuel found Finch standing by a large window, observing the room with a detached air. A glass of expensive red wine held loosely in his hand. He approached casually. He spoke about the wine, its origins in a small, obscure vineyard in France, its complex notes of oak and dark cherry. It was a safe, impersonal topic. Finch, to Samuel's relief, engaged. His voice was soft, his knowledge of wine surprisingly impressive. For a few brief, critical moments, a connection was made. A small seed of familiarity was planted in the barren soil of their relationship. Then, a shadow fell over their conversation, both literally and figuratively. Carolyn Reed. She had inserted herself between them with the practiced ease of a practiced interloper. She did not acknowledge Samuel directly, an act of social erasure that was both deliberate and insulting. She spoke only to Finch, her voice laced with a saccharine condescension that made Samuel's skin crawl. She made a pointed comment about new members and their predictable tastes. Her eyes flicked dismissively toward Samuel's glass. The implication was clear. He did not belong. He was an outsider, an unknown variable in her perfectly controlled equation. Finch, a man who had built his entire life on avoiding ripples and unwanted attention, gave a polite, non-committal nod and drifted away into the crowd. The conversation was over. The seed had been crushed before it could even begin to sprout. Samuel looked at Carolyn. Her smile was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. She was a gatekeeper, guarding the social fortress of Willow Creek, and she had just slammed the gate shut in his face. The pressure intensified in the days that followed. The small confrontations began. They were relentless. A campaign of microaggressions designed to unsettle and intimidate. A guest of Samuel's parked his car for 20 minutes in a visitor spot. The posted limit was 15. Carolyn appeared at his door within the hour, a clipboard in hand. The grass on his front lawn, she claimed one Saturday morning, measured precisely 1/4 of an inch above the regulated height. Another visit. Another thinly veiled warning. Each time, her tone grew sharper, her scrutiny more invasive. She was no longer just enforcing rules. She was hunting. And he was her chosen prey, the true danger. The moment the mission teetered on a knife's edge came a week later. At a neighborhood 4th of July barbecue, Finch was there. A rare public appearance. Likely for the sake of appearances, he approached Samuel near the grill. This time, Finch was the one to initiate the conversation. He asked Samuel about his old tech company, a very specific question, about a piece of esoteric code from their first software release. Something only a true tech enthusiast or a deeply suspicious man doing his own counter-surveillance would ever know. The air grew thin. The smell of charcoal faded. This was a test. A real one. Samuel's heart beat a steady, controlled rhythm against his ribs. He had spent weeks studying his own fake history, memorizing every detail. He answered the question. His voice was casual, filled with a hint of fond, nerdy nostalgia for the old days. He explained the technical details flawlessly, even adding a small, believable anecdote about the programmer who wrote it. He passed the test. He knew he had. But as Finch nodded and walked away, Samuel felt the man's gaze linger on his back. A cold, analytical stare. The seed of doubt had been planted, not by Samuel and Finch, but by Finch and himself. The pressure was now coming from both sides. A crushing pincer movement. The ghost he was hunting was becoming suspicious, alerted by the constant commotion around his new neighbor, and the queen of the neighborhood was tightening her grip, her every move an unwitting act of sabotage. He was caught between a silent shark and a noisy piranha, trapped in a beautiful, sun-drenched cage made of glass. Samuel is now caught between a silent shark and a noisy piranha. Which do you think is the more dangerous threat to his mission? If you believe it's the suspicious criminal, comment shark below. If you think it's the unpredictable neighbor, comment piranha. Stay with me, because how Samuel navigates this impossible situation will determine if the entire operation succeeds or fails. You won't want to miss what happens next. The weight of the badge. That night, long after the last of the barbecue guests had gone home, Samuel sat alone in the dark of his rented house. The silence of the expensive, unfamiliar rooms pressed in on him. The only sound was the quiet, rhythmic hum of the high-end refrigerator. He spoke into a small, encrypted device, a piece of technology that looked like a simple cufflink. His voice was low, tired, stripped of the easy confidence of Robert Vance. On the other end of the secure channel, in a nondescript surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, Special Agent Maria Flores listened intently. "I've faced cartel bosses in tense negotiations," Samuel said, his voice barely a whisper. The words meant only for her. "I've sat across from killers who felt nothing, who would erase a life without a second thought. But none of it wears me down like this. This petty, daily hatred from someone who believes, truly believes, they are doing the right thing. It's exhausting." Maria was quiet for a moment, letting the silence be a form of comfort. She was more than his technical support. She was his partner, his anchor in the disorienting world of deep cover operations. She knew the unique toll this kind of work took on the soul. Samuel continued, his mind drifting back, pulled by the undertow of the evening's stress, back to a lifetime ago. He was a rookie cop then, fresh out of the academy. He was young, idealistic, eager to make a difference. He was on patrol with his first training officer, a veteran cop named Henderson. A good cop, people said, but he had a fire in his belly that too often burned like a short fuse. They pulled over a car for a broken taillight. A simple, routine stop. The driver was a young man, barely out of his teens. He was nervous. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Henderson saw suspicion. He saw deceit. Samuel, even then, saw only fear. Henderson's voice got louder. His questions became accusations. The young man got more scared, more confused, his answers stumbling over each other. The situation escalated, quickly and needlessly. It was a fire fed by assumption and prejudice. A fire that ended with the young man in handcuffs, his face pressed against the hot, gritty asphalt of the road, for nothing more than being afraid while driving a beat-up car in the wrong neighborhood. An innocent person, humiliated and hurt because of one officer's inability to control his own anger. I learned something that day, Samuel told Maria, his voice thick with the 20-year-old memory. I learned that anger is a luxury, a privilege, one I can never afford to have. When you wear this skin, and you carry this badge, calm isn't a choice. It's not a tactic. It's survival. It's the only thing that keeps you from becoming the very thing you're fighting against. It's for me, and for the people I encounter. The confession hung in the secure silence between them. It was the source of his legendary strength. The reason for his unbreakable control, it was not a skill he had learned in training. It was a promise he had made to himself, forged in the heat of another man's anger. A promise he renewed every single day. It was the weight he carried, the true weight of the badge, talking about it, giving voice to that old pain, settled something inside him. The bone-deep exhaustion remained. But beneath it, his resolve hardened like steel. This was more than just a case. It was a continuation of that promise made so long ago. He was not just here to catch a criminal hiding behind a perfect lawn. He was here to prove that there was a better way. A better, stronger way. He refocused his mind. He was ready for the final, dangerous act. The closing window. The message came on that perfect Tuesday morning, just after 9 a.m. As Samuel was halfway through a bowl of oatmeal, it arrived not as a phone call, not as a text, but as a single, coded word that bloomed on the dark screen of his encrypted device. Canary. It was the trigger word they had been waiting 3 long, patient months for. It meant the ghost was about to fly. The gilded cage was about to be empty. Samuel's blood ran cold. A sudden shock of ice in the warm, sunlit kitchen, but his hands remained perfectly steady as he picked up his spoon. He took another bite of oatmeal. A picture of quiet, domestic retirement. Inside his mind, however, a storm of calculations and contingencies was raging. He keyed back a single character on the device. A question mark. The demand for information was instant and absolute. Maria's voice came through his earpiece. A marvel of calm, clipped professionalism. He booked a one-way ticket on a private charter to the Cayman Islands. Wheels up in less than 24 hours. Intelligence from our European counterparts says the final transfer, the big one, is happening today. Sam, the accounts are being liquidated as we speak. The window is closing. Fast. We have one shot at this. One. The plan, codenamed Operation Checkmate, was high risk, high reward, and built on a foundation of pure audacity. For months, they had been trying to find a way to breach Arthur Finch's home security system, a digital fortress that was rumored to be impenetrable, custom designed by hackers from the Eastern Bloc. But they had found a flaw, a tiny, 10-second window of vulnerability that occurred every single day between 10:05 and 10 to 10 a.m. It was the moment the system performed a diagnostic reboot after downloading a security update from a server in Zurich. That reboot was triggered precisely when his network detected the unique radio frequency of the mail carrier's handheld scanner at the curb. To exploit that 10-second window, they needed Finch out of the house, distracted, and looking in the opposite direction. And they needed a much larger distraction for the rest of the neighborhood, something to draw the attention of the dozens of private security cameras and any watching eyes, away from the technical team that would be working furiously from the back of a disguised plumbing van. It had to be something that looked normal, but was just unusual enough to be compelling. The plan was Samuel's, and it was dangerous. He was going to use the Queen. He knew Carolyn Reed watched him. He had seen the curtains twitch in her front window nearly every day. He knew her schedule, her habits, her very predictable triggers. He knew her obsession with absolute order was the most reliable force of nature in this entire unpredictable neighborhood. He was going to use her anger as a tool. He was going to weaponize the homeowners association. He walked outside into the bright morning. The sun was warm on his face. He began moving the planters. the two illegal terracotta pots that had sat by his door for a week. A silent, ticking time bomb of non-compliance. He moved them from one side of the porch to the other. He adjusted their angle by a few degrees. He stepped back, tilted his head, pretending to admire his work. It was a mundane, pointless, and slightly bizarre activity. It was the perfect bait. Inside his own house, 2 doors down, Arthur Finch was also at work. He was not moving planters. He was moving ghosts. Numbers. Millions of them. He sat before a bank of 6 monitors, his face illuminated by the cold, blue light of cascading data. His fingers were a blur across a keyboard. He was executing the final, intricate steps of a plan years in the making. His escape. In a few hours, he would be a ghost again, living on a sun-drenched island under a new name, with a fortune that could never be traced. He felt a flicker of something close to excitement, a rare emotion for a man who prided himself on having no emotions at all. And in her house, directly across the street, Carolyn Reed sat by her window, a cup of Earl Grey tea growing cold in her hands. She had just finished a deeply frustrating phone call with a contractor about the new gazebo for the community park. The paint color was wrong. He had challenged her authority. She felt her perfect world fraying at the edges. Then she looked outside, and she saw him, Samuel Jones, the outsider. The problem, he was moving those hideous, non-compliant planters. A blatant, cheerful act of defiance in the bright morning sun. It was a small thing, but it was the last thing. It was the final straw. All her frustration, all her sense of losing control, focused on that one man and his ugly orange pots. 3 people, 3 separate worlds, all moving toward a single, inevitable point of collision on a perfectly manicured lawn. Carolyn Reed put down her teacup with a sharp, definitive click. She stood up. She smoothed the front of her pressed linen blouse. She opened her front door and stepped out into the perfect, unforgiving light. None of them knew, in that precise moment, that the next 5 minutes would change everything, forever. The Domino Effect. As the Fairfax County patrol car turned the corner, its taillights disappearing from view, carrying a stiffly silent Carolyn Reed away, a new kind of quiet fell over Primrose Lane. It was a silence born of shock and disbelief. Neighbors, drawn by the brief, contained drama, peered from behind drawn curtains and half-open doors, their morning routines shattered. This was the distraction Samuel had planned for. A formal citation, perhaps a heated argument. He had not planned for it to be quite so loud. The spit had changed the equation, but the outcome was the same. Chaos. From the window of his second-floor study, Arthur Finch watched the entire scene unfold with the detached interest of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. He saw the confrontation. He saw the ugly, a shocking moment of the spit. He saw the flash of a federal badge. He saw his nosy, overbearing neighbor, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood purity, being put in handcuffs and placed in a police car. His mind, a finely tuned machine for risk assessment and pattern recognition, processed the information instantly. Police? NF. B. I. Agent living 2 doors down from him. This was not a random domestic dispute. This was a compromised environment. His carefully constructed safe house, his fortress of anonymity, was no longer safe. The gilded cage had sprung a leak. It was time to go. Now, he did not panic. Panic was a fatal flaw, an indulgence for amateurs. He moved with a calm, the methodical urgency that was more terrifying than any frantic scramble. He walked to his desk and initiated a complex sequence on his keyboard, a series of powerful algorithms, his own digital ghosts, began erasing his hard drives, wiping them clean with layers of cryptographic gibberish. He took a small, unassuming leather-bound bag from a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf, his escape kit, a half-dozen pristine passports, bundles of cash in 3 different currencies, a collection of encrypted data drives containing the keys to his new life. He walked out his back door, through his immaculate garden, and toward the detached garage. He believed he was making a clean escape, using the localized chaos in the front of the neighborhood as perfect cover. He was wrong. The chaos was the trap. As Samuel finished giving his preliminary statement to the remaining local officer, he made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand, a subtle brush of his fingers against his chin, an act that looked like thoughtful contemplation. In the surveillance van, Maria Flores saw it on her high-definition monitor. It was the signal. "Checkmate. Checkmate," she said into her microphone, her voice a calm command center in the humming, tech-filled space. "All teams. Domino is in effect. I repeat, Domino is in effect. Target is mobile, heading for the garage. He thinks he's running. Let him run." The chase was not a high-speed pursuit with screeching tires and blaring siren. It was a silent, technological hunt, a masterpiece of modern surveillance, a small, magnetic GPS tracker, no bigger than a quarter, which Samuel had managed to place on the undercarriage of Finch's car during a feigned neighborly chat about organic gardening a week prior, was now active. Maria and her team watched a small green dot move with unnerving precision across a digital map of the city. They rerouted traffic cameras on the fly to follow his progress. They anticipated his every move, his every likely turn. Finch believed he was a ghost, slipping away through the cracks, unnoticed. In reality, he was a specimen under a microscope, every turn and decision being observed, analyzed, and countered before he even made it. 10 miles away, on the dullest toll road, the trap closed. It was not a dramatic roadblock or a spike strip. It was far more elegant, more psychologically devastating. As Finch's car approached the toll plaza, two black, nondescript sedans moved in smoothly from the adjacent lanes, one in front, one behind. They boxed him in, slowing to a gentle, unavoidable stop just before the toll booth. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, just the quiet, inexorable closing of a steel cage. Two agents, a man and a woman in simple, well-tailored business attire, stepped out of the cars. They did not draw their weapons. They approached Finch's window with calm, purposeful strides and simply held up their badges, the universal symbol of a game that was definitively over. Samuel arrived on the scene minutes later, his own car pulling up behind the captured vehicle. He walked up to the driver's side window. Arthur Finch looked up, his face pale, his composure finally cracked. He saw the man he knew as Robert Vance, his quiet, eccentric, and slightly annoying neighbor. And in that single, crushing instant, he understood everything. The wine club, the barbecue, the planters, the beautiful, elaborate, and perfectly executed trap. He did not speak. He did not protest. He simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of respect, a silent acknowledgement of defeat, from one master of a hidden game to another. The whispers of Willow Creek. The news hit Willow Creek not like a thunderclap, but like a slow, creeping poison that seeped into the foundations of every perfect house. 2 arrests. On the same day, on the same quiet, immaculately maintained street. First, Carolyn Reed, their fierce protector of property values and arbiter of acceptable beige tones, was led away in handcuffs for a common assault. Then, hours later, the whispers began about Arthur Finch, the quiet, almost invisible man from number 210. The whispers spoke of federal agents in unmarked cars, of international money laundering, of a vast criminal empire being run from behind a perfectly pruned hedge and a subscription to the local gardening newsletter. The community, a place built on the illusion of predictable tranquility, went into a state of collective, paralyzed shock. Then, the video appeared. Someone, a teenager filming from an upstairs bedroom window, had captured 45 seconds of the raw, unfiltered confrontation between Samuel and Carolyn. It was shaky. The audio was muffled by the wind, but the images were brutally, undeniably clear. Carolyn's angry, contorted face, Samuel's stoic, infuriating calm, and the final, ugly act. The video, uploaded anonymously, spread through the neighborhood's private online forum like a wildfire. Then it leaked, as all such things do, to a local news blog under the headline, HOA President Spits on Resident in Affluent Community. The gilded cage had not just been opened, it had been shattered, and its residents were left standing in the ruins, exposed to the harsh judgment of the outside world. The carefully constructed facade of Willow Creek began to crack and crumble. The weekly neighborhood potluck was canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. The monthly wine club meeting was attended by 3 people, who sat in awkward silence. At the community mailboxes, neighbors who had known each other for years would suddenly find their own shoes intensely interesting, their gazes fixed on the pavement, desperately avoiding eye contact. A profound, uncomfortable silence, thick with shame and recrimination, settled over the manicured lawns and the perfectly painted front doors. The reactions in the online forum were a painful mixture of denial and shame. A vocal minority defended Carolyn. She was just stressed, they said. She was only trying to uphold the standards that made their community so desirable and kept their home values high. A fine. It was just a fine she was trying to enforce. But a larger, quieter group was horrified. They spoke, for the first time publicly, of Carolyn's years of petty tyranny. The constant stream of little notes, the public shaming at HOA meetings over trivial infractions. They wondered how they had let it go on for so long. They wondered what their own complicit silence said about them. Samuel, his mission now complete and his cover no longer necessary, became a quiet spectator to the fallout. He watched the community grapple with its own ugly reflection, and he felt no triumph, only a quiet, lingering sadness. This place, so obsessed with maintaining a perfect surface, had allowed a poison to grow in its roots, all in the name of order and control. One evening, his last in the house, as he sat on his porch watching the sun set, an elderly man from across the street approached his property. It was Mr. Miller, a quiet widower Samuel had only ever nodded to in passing. He walked slowly, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He did not say much. He held out a small plate covered in aluminum foil. "My wife, she used to make these for new neighbors," Mr. Miller said, his voice raspy with age and disuse. "Chocolate chip." He placed the plate on the small table next to Samuel's chair. He looked at Samuel, his old, watery eyes filled with a deep, weary sorrow that seemed to encompass more than just the day's events. "I'm sorry for what happened here. That woman, she does not speak for all of us." Mr. Miller turned and walked away without another word, leaving Samuel alone with the unexpected gift. A small act, a simple apology, but in the profound, fractured silence of Willow Creek, it felt like the loudest, most meaningful sound he had heard in months. It was, perhaps, how the healing, if it was ever to happen, would have to begin. In the fractured silence of Willow Creek, one small act of kindness finally broke through. But is it enough to heal the poison that has spread for so long? If that moment gives you hope for this community, comment hope below. Before hope can truly take root, however, a final judgment must be passed on the Queen and the Ghost. This is Deepu Kader Stories, where even the quietest moments echo the loudest. Reckoning. The wheels of justice, once they begin their slow, inexorable turn, are notoriously indifferent. They do not care about manicured lawns or community status, or the meticulously crafted illusions of a perfect life. They care only for the cold, hard weight of evidence. And in the months that followed the unraveling on Primrose Lane, that weight was brought to bear on 2 very different individuals, in 2 very different, sterile courtrooms. Carolyn Reed's case was a local affair, a small drama adjudicated in the beige and brown confines of the Fairfax County Courthouse. She was no longer the queen of anything, dressed in a conservative navy suit that seemed a size too large for her diminished frame, her face pale and drawn. She was just another defendant, waiting for her name to be called. The prosecution, efficient and clinical, presented the case. They played the video, clear and damning on a large screen for the entire court to see. They presented Samuel's testimony, delivered in a calm, factual, and utterly devastating monotone. He did not embellish. He did not accuse. He simply stated what had happened. They presented the charge: simple assault on a federal officer, a serious crime. Her defense attorney argued that it was a moment of extreme stress, a regrettable aberration from an otherwise exemplary life. They painted a picture of a dedicated, unpaid community leader, pushed to her breaking point by a difficult and uncooperative new resident. But the video, played a second time, told a simpler, woolier, and more believable story. The judge's verdict was swift. It landed in the quiet courtroom with the finality of a gavel. Guilty. He did not sentence her to jail time. He gave her something she likely considered far worse. A punishment designed to dismantle the very core of her identity. 2 years of probation. A mandatory, court-ordered anger management and cultural sensitivity program. 100 hours of it. And the final, crushing blow, a 10-year ban from serving in any capacity on any homeowners association board in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Her reign was over. Her power, the only thing that had ever truly defined her, the currency with which she had purchased her self-worth, was stripped away completely and publicly. She had lost her kingdom, not to an invading army, but to the small, bitter poison within her own heart. Arthur Finch's reckoning was a quieter, far more significant affair, conducted in the hushed, secure halls of a federal building where the stakes were measured in decades and billions of dollars. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable digital evidence pulled from his encrypted drives by the Bureau's best cryptographers, the ghost chose not to fight a losing battle. He chose to bargain. He chose to survive. In a series of debriefings that lasted for weeks, the ghost began to talk, and the stories he told were astonishing. He laid bare the financial skeletons of a dozen international corporations and 3 different drug cartels. His cooperation, given in exchange for a reduced sentence and placement in the witness protection program, led to a cascade of indictments and asset seizures that echoed across the globe. Hundreds of millions of dollars in illicit funds were frozen in accounts from Zurich to Singapore. Powerful men in expensive suits were quietly arrested in their boardrooms in New York and their villas in Miami. The devil's accountant, in a final, masterful act of self-preservation, had become the government's most valuable and most dangerous witness. Weeks later, back in his quiet, familiar office in the Hoover Building, Samuel Jones typed the final sentence of his lengthy after-action report for Operation Gilded Cage. He paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He thought about the strange, chaotic confluence of events, the petty tyranny of the HOA, the global reach of a brilliant financial criminal, the way one had so improbably led to the downfall of the other. He added one last, concluding thought. A final analysis of the mission's improbable success. He wrote, "The capture of Arthur Finch was successful not in spite of the civilian interference, but, paradoxically, because of it. The secondary subject's uncontrolled emotional response, while posing an initial risk, ultimately created the perfect, albeit unplanned, operational cover that precipitated the target's flight. It proves a strange and often overlooked truth in our line of work sometimes. The shortest path to order runs directly through chaos." He hit the print key. The printer across the room whirred to life. The mission was officially over. The file was closed. The garden on Primrose Lane. 2 months later, on a cool, clear autumn morning, a moving truck was parked in the driveway of number 214. The house was empty now. The rooms echoed with the ghosts of a life that had never been real. Smelling of fresh paint and new carpets, Robert Vance, the eccentric tech millionaire, had vanished as quietly and mysteriously as he had arrived. His purpose served. Samuel Jones, wearing simple jeans and a worn gray sweatshirt that was entirely his own, carried the last cardboard box to the truck. It contained little more than a few books and a small coffee maker. He paused on the driveway after closing the truck's rear door, looking around at Willow Creek Estates. It was different now, not in the way it looked, but in the way it felt. It was quieter. The manicured lawns were the same. the houses just as perfect, a monument to suburban order, but the oppressive tension that had once hung in the air like a thick, inescapable humidity was gone. It had been replaced by something lighter, something more breathable. There was a new HOA president, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Gable, who seemed to favor gentle, handwritten reminders over formal, intimidating citations. People seemed to linger a bit longer when they collected their mail from the community boxes, offering small waves and hesitant, genuine smiles to each other. It was not a revolution. It was not a grand transformation, but it was a change, a subtle, fragile, and unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. He was about to get into his personal car, a practical sedan that would never have belonged to Robert Vance, to follow the truck out of the neighborhood for the last time. But he stopped. He walked back toward the house, to the small patch of garden near the front porch where Carolyn Reed had once stood. Her face a mask of rage. From the deep pocket of his jacket, he took out a small, potted plant he had purchased at a local nursery that morning. It was a single rose bush, a variety the nursery owner had called Resilience, known for its hardy nature and its ability to thrive in difficult, unexpected conditions. With his bare hands, he dug a small, neat hole in the rich, dark earth. The soil was cool and damp. He gently removed the rose bush from its flimsy plastic container, taking care not to damage the delicate web of its roots. He settled it into its new home. He packed the soil firmly around its base, a silent blessing, a quiet prayer for growth. It was a small, quiet act. No one was watching. It was a gesture meant for no one but himself, a silent offering, a hope. A final piece of data entered into the permanent record of this place. As he drove away from Primrose Lane for the final time, the moving truck, a large, lumbering shape in his rearview mirror. Samuel thought about the true nature of his work. He had spent most of his career fighting monsters. Big, obvious monsters. Men who ran vast criminal empires and left clear trails of destruction in their wake. They were easy to identify, if not always easy to catch. They were the storms, the earthquakes, the destructive forces of nature. But this mission, this strange, intimate, and deeply personal battle in a suburban paradise, had reminded him of a different, more complicated truth. It had reminded him that the hardest, most important fights are sometimes not against the storm, but against the quiet, creeping rot, the fear in a neighbor's heart, the arrogance baked into a community rulebook, the quiet, corrosive power of good people looking the other way. The big monsters can be locked behind bars, their empires dismantled, their names reduced to case files in a federal archive. But the gardens of the human soul, he thought as he merged his car onto the highway, leaving the perfect houses of Willow Creek behind him for good, they require constant, patient, and often thankless tending. Every single day. The story ends there, with the image of Samuel's car disappearing into the anonymous flow of traffic, and the final, lingering thought of a single, resilient rose, its small green leaves catching the autumn sun, just beginning to take root in the quiet earth of a garden on Primrose Lane. In the end, the story from Primrose Lane teaches us that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most powerful. True strength isn't found in enforcing small rules or asserting dominance, but in the quiet, unwavering discipline of one's own character, especially in the face of hatred. I'd be moved to read what you took away from Samuel's story in the comment. If these kinds of narratives resonate with you, I would be honored if you would consider subscribing to Deepu Kader Stories to explore more of them with me. Thank you for your time and for sharing this journey.